color is the visual perception based on the electromagnetic spectrum. Though color is not an inherent property of matter, color perception is related to an object's light absorption, reflection, emission spectra, and interference. For most humans, colors are perceived in the visible light spectrum with 3 types of cone cells. Other animals may have a different number of cone cell types or have eyes sensitive to different wavelength, such as bees that can distinguish ultraviolet, and thus have a different color sensitivity range. Animal perception of color originates from different light wavelength or spectral sensitivity in cone cell types, which is then processed by the brain. Colors have perceived properties such as hue, colorfulness, and luminance. Colors can also be additively mixed or subtractively mixed. If the colors are mixed in the right proportions, because of metamerism, they may look the same as a single wavelength light. For convenience, colors can be organized in a color space, which when being abstracted as a mathematical color model can assign each region of color with a corresponding set of numbers. As such, color spaces are an essential tool for color reproduction in print, photography, computer monitors, and television. The most well-known color models are RGB, CMYK, YUV, HSL, and HSV. Electromagnetic radiation is characterized by its wavelength and its intensity. When the wavelength is within the visible spectrum, it is known as visible light. Most light sources emit light at many different wavelengths. A source's spectrum is a distribution giving its intensity at each wavelength. Although the spectrum of light arriving at the eye from a given direction determines the color sensation in that direction, there are many more possible spectral combinations than color sensations. In fact, one may formally define a color as a class of spectra that give rise to the same color sensation, although such classes would vary widely among different species, and to a lesser extent among individuals within the same species. In each such class, the members are called metamers of the color in question. This effect can be visualized by comparing the light source's spectral power distributions and the resulting colors. The familiar colors of the rainbow in the spectrum, named using the Latin word for appearance or apparition by Isaac Newton in 1671, include all those colors that can be produced by visible light of a single wavelength only, the pure spectral or monochromatic colors. The spectrum above shows approximate wavelengths for spectral colors in the visible range. Spectral colors have 100% purity and are fully saturated. A complex mixture of spectral colors can be used to describe any color, which is the definition of a light power spectrum. The spectral colors form a continuous spectrum, and how it is divided into distinct colors linguistically is a matter of culture and historical contingency. Despite the ubiquitous Rooibiv mnemonic used to remember the spectral colors in English, the inclusion or exclusion of colors is contentious, with disagreement often focused on indigo and cyan. Even if the subset of color terms is agreed, their wavelength ranges and borders between them may not be. The physical color of an object depends on how it absorbs and scatters light. Most objects scatter light to some degree and do not reflect or transmit light specularly like glasses or mirrors. A transparent object allows almost all light to transmit or pass through, thus transparent objects are perceived as colorless. Conversely, an opaque object does not allow light to transmit through and instead absorbing or reflecting the light it receives. Like transparent objects, translucent objects allow light to transmit through, but translucent objects are seen colored because they scatter or absorb certain wavelengths of light via internal scatterance. The absorbed light is often dissipated as heat. Although Aristotle and other ancient scientists had already written on the nature of light and color vision, it was not until Newton that light was identified as the source of the color sensation. In 1810, Goethe published his comprehensive theory of colors, in which he provided a rational description of color experience, which tells us how it originates, not what it is. In 1801, Thomas Young proposed his trichromatic theory, based on the observation that any color could be matched with a combination of three lights. This theory was later refined by James Clerk Maxwell and Hermann von Helmholtz. As Helmholtz puts it, the principles of Newton's law of mixture were experimentally confirmed by Maxwell in 1856. Young's theory of color sensations, like so much else that this marvelous investigator achieved in advance of his time, remained unnoticed until Maxwell directed attention to it. The ability of the human eye to distinguish colors is based upon the varying sensitivity of different cells in the retina to light of different wavelengths. Humans are trichromatic. The retina contains three types of color receptor cells, or cones. One type, relatively distinct from the other two, is most responsive to light that is perceived as blue or blue-violet, with wavelengths around 450 nanometers. Cones of this type are sometimes called short wavelength cones or S-cones. The other two types are closely related genetically and chemically. Middle wavelength cones, M-cones, or green cones are most sensitive to light perceived as green, with wavelengths around 540 nanometers, while the long wavelength cones, L-cones, or red cones, are most sensitive to light that is perceived as greenish-yellow, with wavelengths around 570 nanometers. Light, no matter how complex its composition of wavelengths, is reduced to three color components by the eye. Each cone type adheres to the principle of univariance, which is that each cone's output is determined by the amount of light that falls on it over all wavelengths. For each location in the visual field, the three types of cones yield three signals based on the extent to which each is stimulated. These amounts of stimulation are sometimes called tri-stimulus values. While the mechanisms of color vision at the level of the retina are well described in terms of tri-stimulus values, color processing after that point is organized differently. A dominant theory of color vision proposes that color information is transmitted out of the eye by three opponent processes, or opponent channels, each constructed from the raw output of the cones: a red-green channel, a blue-yellow channel, and a black-white luminance channel. This theory has been supported by neurobiology and accounts for the structure of our subjective color experience. Specifically, it explains why humans cannot perceive a reddish-green or yellowish-blue, and it predicts the color wheel. It is the collection of colors for which at least one of the two color channels measures a value at one of its extremes. The exact nature of color perception beyond the processing already described, and indeed the status of color as a feature of the perceived world, or rather as a feature of our perception of the world, a type of quality, is a matter of complex and continuing philosophical dispute. A color vision deficiency causes an individual to perceive a smaller gamut of colors than the standard observer with normal color vision. The effect can be mild, having lower color resolution, moderate, lacking an entire dimension or channel of color, or complete, lacking all color perception. Most forms of color blindness derive from one or more of the three classes of cone cells either being missing, having a shifted spectral sensitivity, or having lower responsiveness to incoming light. In addition, cerebral achromatopsia is caused by neural anomalies in those parts of the brain where visual processing takes place. Some colors that appear distinct to an individual with normal color vision will appear metameric to the colorblind. The most common form of color blindness is congenital red-green color blindness, affecting 8% of males. Individuals with the strongest form of this condition will experience blue and purple, green and yellow, teal and gray as colors of confusion. Outside of humans, which are mostly trichromatic, most mammals are dichromatic, possessing only 2 cones. However, outside of mammals, most vertebrate are tetrachromatic, having 4 types of cones, and includes most birds, reptiles, amphibians, and bony fish. An extra dimension of color vision means these vertebrates can see 2 distinct colors that a normal human would view as metamers. Some invertebrates, such as the mantis shrimp, have an even higher number of cones that could lead to a richer color gamut than even imaginable by humans. In certain forms of synesthesia, perceiving letters and numbers or hearing sounds will evoke a perception of color. Behavioral and functional neuroimaging experiments have demonstrated that these color experiences lead to changes in behavioral tasks and lead to increased activation of brain regions involved in color perception, thus demonstrating their reality. And similarity to real color percepts, albeit evoked through a non-standard route. Synesthesia can occur genetically, with 4% of the population having variants associated with the condition. Synesthesia has also been known to occur with brain damage, drugs, and sensory deprivation. After exposure to strong light in their sensitivity range, photoreceptors of a given type become desensitized. For a few seconds after the light ceases, they will continue to signal less strongly than they otherwise would. Colors observed during that period will appear to lack the color component detected by the desensitized photoreceptors. This effect is responsible for the phenomenon of afterimages, in which the eye may continue to see a bright figure after looking away from it, but in a complementary color. Afterimage effects have also been used by artists, including Vincent van Gogh. When an artist uses a limited color palette, the human eye tends to compensate by seeing any gray or neutral color as the color which is missing from the color wheel. For example, in a limited palette consisting of red, yellow, black, and white, a mixture of yellow and black will appear as a variety of green, a mixture of red and black will appear as a variety of purple, and pure gray will appear bluish. The trichromatic theory is strictly true when the visual system is in a fixed state of adaptation. In reality, the visual system is constantly adapting to changes in the environment and compares the various colors in a scene to reduce the effects of the illumination. If a scene is illuminated with one light and then with another, as long as the difference between the light sources stays within a reasonable range, the colors in the scene appear relatively constant to us. Color reproduction is the science of creating colors for the human eye that faithfully represent the desired color. It focuses on how to construct a spectrum of wavelengths that will best evoke a certain color in an observer. Most colors are not spectral colors, meaning they are mixtures of various wavelengths of light. However, these non-spectral colors are often described by their dominant wavelength, which identifies the single wavelength of light that produces a sensation most similar to the non-spectral color. There are many color perceptions that by definition cannot be pure spectral colors due to denaturation or because they are purples. Some examples of necessarily non-spectral colors are the achromatic colors and colors such as pink, tan, and magenta. Two different light spectra that have the same effect on the 3 color receptors in the human eye will be perceived as the same color. They are metamers of that color. This is exemplified by the white light emitted by fluorescent lamps, which typically has a spectrum of a few narrow bands, while daylight has a continuous spectrum. The human eye cannot tell the difference between such light spectra just by looking into the light source, although the color rendering index of each light source may affect the color of objects illuminated by these metameric light sources. Added additive color is light created by mixing together light of two or more different colors. Red, green, and blue are the additive primary colors normally used in additive color systems such as projectors, televisions, and computer terminals. Subtractive coloring uses dyes, inks, pigments, or filters to absorb some wavelengths of light and not others. The color that a surface displays comes from the parts of the visible spectrum that are not absorbed and therefore remain visible. Without pigments or dye, fabric fibers, paint base, and paper are usually made of particles that scatter white light well in all directions. When a pigment or ink is added, wavelengths are absorbed or subtracted from white light, so light of another color reaches the eye. If the light is not a pure white source, the resulting spectrum will appear a slightly different color. Red paint, viewed under blue light, may appear black. Red paint is red because it scatters only the red components of the spectrum. If red paint is illuminated by blue light, it will be absorbed by the red paint, creating the appearance of a black object. Structural colors are colors caused by interference effects rather than by pigments. Color effects are produced when a material is scored with fine parallel lines, formed of one or more parallel thin layers, or otherwise composed of microstructures on the scale of the color's wavelength. If the microstructures are spaced randomly, light of shorter wavelengths will be scattered preferentially to produce Tyndall effect colors, the blue of the sky, the luster of opals, and the blue of human irises. If the microstructures are aligned in arrays, for example, the array of pits in a CD, they behave as a diffraction grating. The grating reflects different wavelengths in different directions due to interference phenomena, separating mixed white light into light of different wavelengths. If the structure is one or more thin layers, then it will reflect some wavelengths and transmit others, depending on the layer's thickness.